Guys, we have big news today. The Grayscale ETF, the SEC might be forced. Like the judges might force them to actually accept it. If they accept that ETF, they might have to accept all the ETFs, and I think they will. But it might actually be this week. That's how crazy it is right now. The thing is, Grayscale sued the SEC to allow a Bitcoin ETF, and it was in the Washington, D.C. district. And they could rule on it this week. Why this specific week? Because generally the D.C. Circuit District cycles out judges every August and in every September, and these judges might actually want to clear out the caseload before the new guard arrives. And also, these court cases are heard usually within 160 days of an oral testimony. 94% of them are. So that gives a very high percentage. Now, obviously, there's a 6% chance that they're not, but 94% of the cases are. And they usually hear them within 160 days since an oral statement. And Grayscale delivered its oral arguments on March 7th, and it has actually been 160 days. So those two things combined together could produce a Bitcoin ETF sometime this week. Scott Johnson, he's saying March 21, 22 cases with decisions within 160 days of oral, 30 to 32. Add that to the fact that we just said that they are cycling out judges and they might want to clear the caseload. And days since the Grayscale oral argument is 160 days. Why should we expect August? Because the law clerks for DC generally cycle in out this month. So judges aim to clear prior caseload before the new guard arrives. So basically, he also said this earlier, all of the March 2022 decided cases argued in front of the DC Circuit Court were done within 154 days, save one outlier at 170 days. It's been 156 days since Grayscale was argued, and there's only a small handful remaining undecided March argued cases. So there's actually not that many cases left. Now, some of you might actually be afraid, saying, could they reject the Grayscale ETF? Yes, they could definitely rule in the SEC's favor. But from the preliminary arguments, the judges did not seem to be very convinced with the SEC's logic. Obviously, because the SEC's logic actually sucks. The judges literally said to the SEC, hey, you know what? Those spot ETFs and those futures ETFs look exactly the same. And Ginzer was like, yes, they're the same exactly 99% of the time. And the judges were like, then why the hell don't you approve a spot ETF? They're like, but they're different. But I don't actually think that judges actually bought that. And let's not forget the amicus brief in terms of Coinbase. Well, that's a different court case altogether. But that stuff is just piling against the SEC. A lot of people are submitting amicus briefs. And obviously, the whole securities thing with Ripple, that's tearing at the SEC's reputation. And judges are human. Even though it won't affect them that much, they're aware of these things that are actually going on. So the thing is, we could definitely get a Bitcoin ETF this week if things go in our favor. And I'm really hoping they shut down the SEC and their shenanigans this week in our favor. So the Grayscale ETF could actually be approved this week. And if it's actually approved, I do think they'll approve the other 7 because they would rather have BlackRock and Fidelity and the big financial institutions with a crypto ETF rather than just Grayscale having the only ETF, especially if you buy into the theory that they work for BlackRock, because BlackRock does not want to be beat to the punch by Grayscale or any other smaller institutions. Same thing with Fidelity, same thing with a lot of the others. So the SEC might be trying to delay this as much as possible, but a court ruling could shut their delay tactics all down. And I'm really hoping that's what happens with the SEC because they definitely deserve to have their shenanigans shut down. And to add more pressure to the SEC's ETF approval, Europe first approved its first spot Bitcoin ETF. Now, the thing is, some people have been saying it's an ETP, not an ETF. It is actually an ETF. This article from CoinDesk makes certain that people understand it is not an ETP, it is not an ETN, but it is an actual ETF. So the thing is, the ETF is called Jacoby. It was approved in October 2021. They planned to list it last year, but there were some delays, and they're finally going forth with it right now. The ticker will be BITCOIN, and it's going to be listed on Amsterdam. And they specifically said in the article, even though Europe has had ETPs and ETNs, this is the first ETF they're actually going to list. Of course, I think the collapse of the Terra ecosystem and the collapse of FTX did actually delay their plans to actually list this coin. But now, since Europe actually has an ETF, I do think the US is going to be racing to get an ETF in there as well, because they don't want to lose to the EU. And maybe the judges will actually see that. They're going to see ETFs are going around all around the world. And there's no real reason for the SEC to actually deny an ETF, because spot and futures ETFs are the same thing. And futures ETFs are actually more dangerous and more likely to actually be manipulated, because you don't need the actual asset to manipulate a futures ETF. You just need to buy a bunch of futures contracts, which is much easier to manage. Of course, that could have been the original plan anyways. BlackRock was like, hey, we want something that we don't have to buy, but we can manipulate anyways. And the SEC is like, hey, well, how about these futures ETFs? And BlackRock was like, that sounds like a great idea for us to keep the price down until we can actually get the spot ETFs in. So they could actually be denied for that particular reason. And the thing is, this is all pointing to another bull run. And there's another article saying that Bitcoin's record low volatility and decline in short-term holders could signal a bull market signal, because the short-term declines, as you've seen, haven't really gone down very much. The SEC has thrown everything at the kitchen sink, including an emergency appeal to try to bring the market down, but it just has not been working. And traders may believe that Bitcoin's low volatility is a bull market signal, but their bias could be preventing them from acknowledging potentially negative macro outcomes. The thing is, they could deny all the ETFs, but I just don't think that's going to happen. This Grayscale case is definitely building into it. Binance has just sued the SEC for protection. So I do actually think there's a lot of stuff building against the SEC. And if I really look at it, it's really the regulatory environment in the United States that's holding crypto back right now. It's not really anything else. You could talk about the bad economy and the low interest rates, but people are still investing in tech stocks. But tech stocks obviously have regulatory clarity, and the crypto market doesn't. So people are still willing to take risks, and if they're borrowing money to buy tech stocks, they should be willing to borrow money to buy other risky assets as well. But people are just not sure where crypto is going because of the SEC and congressional shenanigans. Like we said yesterday, Congress is actually making basically a bipartisan turn towards crypto, with just as many Democrats as Republicans having to own crypto. So congressmen are seeing their constituents are actually pro-crypto. And so they're not going to be in the SEC's corner forever. And plus, there is a commissioner on the SEC, Hester Pierce, that is pretty pro-crypto and that will actually go against and dissent from what Gary Gensler is doing. And she even got one of the other commissioners to dissent with her on the ETF stuff. So realistically, things are definitely turning against the SEC, and there's really not that much they can do about it. Plus, if they get the ruling that the Grayscale has to become an ETF, they'll definitely approve the other ones just as well. They might try to appeal the ruling, but I don't think that will be very, very successful. And another point of interest is that trading volume is rising on SEC sued coins this week, whether it's Cardano, Polygon, etc., etc. People are actually getting interested in those coins. And you know why? Because I think there are investors, especially people who are knowledgeable at the crypto world, that see the SEC as slowly falling apart in their arguments. And they want to front run when the SEC finally completely falls apart on their arguments, because I do think they realize the SEC is eventually inevitably going to lose. I think if Coinbase gets the lawsuit dismissed, that's the nail in the coffin. If Grayscale wins this lawsuit this week or sometime else, that's the nail in the coffin as well. So they're seeing a lot of pitfalls for SEC. And I think they're secretly buying right now because they know that any of these events could trigger a big bull run. Obviously, I think the money supply and the Fed keeping interest rates high plays a lot into Bitcoin not going up right now. And that's going to stay for a while. But I do think if Bitcoin and crypto get regulatory clarity, especially come next year during the halving, I definitely think it can at least catch up to somewhat of the stock market. Regardless if the economy stagnates or not, I do think Bitcoin can at least catch up to the stock markets. And that would mean like Bitcoin would be at like $60,000. And, I don't think the Fed's printing any more money right now, but they are going to ease up on the interest rate hikes. I do believe that the July one was probably the last one. The inflation report for this month actually came out to be better than expected. So I don't think they're going to be in a crazy situation where they actually want to raise the interest rates that much more, because they are making it really hard for at least the smaller banks to actually survive. So a lot of macro factors are going into this. A lot of people are speculating, and I think people are waiting on the sidelines to come into crypto, and just retail investors too. I think all they're really waiting for is regulatory clarity. They're not really waiting for the market to turn back up. They just don't want the SEC or another government agency to shut the entire market down after they've actually tossed money in. So like these rulings with Grayscale, these rulings with Coinbase are absolutely critical. And right now, it does not actually look like these things are turning in the SEC's favor. And as we've seen from the Ripple case, the SEC is far from invincible. So I do think we can see a really big breakthrough within the next couple of weeks, pending on the outcome of these lawsuits. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.